This morning we are going to finish our first half of our study of the Gospel of Luke. We are going to talk about the resurrection next week, Easter Sunday, and then we'll begin a new series on images of the church, different metaphors and analogies for the church in the Bible and what they mean for us and how we should be thinking about ourselves as a group. So we're going to finish up our first half of the study in Luke 12 and 13. Last week, we established the foundation of spiritual thinking. I want to put all these up here so you can look at them, and we're not going to go over these again, but this is what we looked at last week in Luke 12 and 13. The foundation of thinking the way that Jesus does. And it begins with considering eternity. That is, in fact, how the Hebrew author describes Jesus' own way of thinking, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross and despised the shame. The joy that was set before him is the thing that he's building, the thing that he's going to build. He tells Thomas, right, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. Jesus, his own thinking begins with this consideration of the eternal home that he's building and who he's including in that home. So for us, as Jesus teaches in 12 and 13, the revealing of all hidden motives and actions, he says in 12:1 through 3, we need to be aware of that. The authority of God to cast into hell, 12:4 and 5. The suddenness of judgment in 12:13 through 21. The unexpected nature, that is, it's going to be sudden and it's also going to be unpredictable in 13:25 through 48. The universality, actually, I think that's chapter 12, 25 through 48. That's okay. The universality of judgment. Everybody's going to be facing the same judgment in 13:1 through 5. And then the terror of judgment. And several times in chapter 13 and chapter 12, Jesus ties this to fear. Don't fear those who can kill the body, but fear him who has the authority to cast into hell. The idea of fear in the chapter, the story of the guy, the tower that fell on the guys we talked about in class this morning, it was mentioned in chapter 13. The tower fell, and Jesus says, do you think that they were worse sinners? No. Unless you likewise repent, you will perish. So Jesus is tying our thinking of spiritual nature into considering eternity as the foundation. We're thinking about things from an eternal perspective. But the second question is then, what does that mature into? Okay, if eternal thinking is the base, how should this kind of thinking manifest then in our thinking about present concerns? That is, in our present situation. Not just in eternity, but thinking about my life now. I'm building my thinking process on spiritual, eternal concerns. But then what does that mean for the moment today? First, there is a process of thinking as we go through 12 and 13 that we need to develop. And several of the stories demonstrate this kind of process. We begin with eternal concerns, spiritual concerns, and we reason from them into practical application. Chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered, they began to trample one another. He began to say to his disciples, first, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. We mentioned this already. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Spiritual thinking, as we begin with thinking about eternal things, needs to manifest in consistency, or put another way, truthfulness. That you are aligning your actions with your stated beliefs. Consistency is a hard trait to cultivate. I've been doing a deep dive on the class I'm going to do in the fall on removing barriers to belief and sort of it's an apologetics kind of class. And one of the main things that we're going to talk about is the difficulty with being consistent. Barriers to belief, why a lot of people don't believe in Jesus, is they are inconsistent in their application of their worldview. They don't have a consistency of reasoning from their beliefs, or at least the things that they state they believe, into what are the implications for that for my life. We as Christians need to have a consistent attitude. That is, of course, the opposite of hypocrisy. The accusation of hypocrisy of the Pharisees is they stated some beliefs, they believed some things about God, but that did not lead to consistency in their actions and in the things that they taught. Spiritual thinking requires self-examination and accountability, that as I'm considering my own life, the things that I do, the way that I live, the things that I say, is that consistent with what I think I believe? Is that consistent with what I tell others I believe? And really, one of the things that I reference this quite a bit, a line that I heard one time that really stuck with me. We all really have two sets of beliefs. There's the things we say we believe, the things we think we believe, but then there's the things we actually believe, which are known by how we act, how we behave. Part of spiritual thinking is bringing those things into harmony. The things that I behave that demonstrate my real beliefs with the things that I think I believe, the things that I say out loud. Luke 12:8-9, I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men, the Son of Man will acknowledge before the angels of God, but the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. Again, we're thinking about the spiritual, the eternal concern. That is the identity of Jesus, his eventual return and judgment. The standing before God and the either acknowledgement or denial. That's an eternal principle, an eternal concern that manifests then in present concerns. The willingness to acknowledge allegiance to Jesus, not in eternity, everybody's going to do that, to acknowledge allegiance to Jesus now in this life. Again, this is an element of consistency between what we say we believe and how we act. If you're not willing to say the hard thing now, then Jesus is not going to say it for you in judgment. Again, we're beginning with an eternal concern, the present reality or the eventual reality of judgment, and reasoning from that to, well, if judgment is a real thing, if judgment is going to happen, what does that mean for my day-to-day life now? Well, one of the things it means is I need to be willing to acknowledge my allegiance to Jesus. I need to be willing to publicly confess, to say that I am, in fact, a follower of Christ, no matter what that consequence may bring, however difficulty that may result in my life. Am I willing to stand up and say, yes, I believe in Jesus? Luke 12:13-21. We read this last week. It's worth reading again. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man," and again, I really think about how this is said, "Man, who made me a judge over you?" Well, the answer is the Father. The Father made him a judge over us. But they were confusing the judgment of Jesus with physical, temporal concerns. And Jesus' point is not that he's not the judge. He is the judge. But his point is, this is not the kind of thing that I'm here to judge. This is not the kind of thing that I'm here to decide. I'm here to decide a bigger, more eternal, more significant thing. He said to them, "Take care. Be on guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." He told them a parable saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully, and he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? I have nowhere to store my crops. I'm so rich, I have nowhere to put all my stuff.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and I will store all my grain and my goods. Then I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.'" And we kind of see the attitude of the guy. He's so rich, he's so wealthy, I'm so great. I've finally gotten to a point where I can enjoy all the work that I've done. And then God said to him, what? "Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Thinking spiritually begins with the eternal concern. What God will require of us in the judgment. What kinds of resources will avail us in that situation? It is coming. And Jesus' point here, all of the possessions that guy had built up, those were not going to be of any help in the judgment. They were going to make a difference. Somebody else was going to enjoy those in this life. They were temporal. They were tied to this life. Jesus' return or our own end are both unknown things, unable to be anticipated. And so based on that foundational understanding, it grows into the present concern. What does that mean for the life here and now? What value do my present possessions have, really, when measured on an eternal time scale? Mathematically, the answer is 0. Any finite number divided by infinity is 0. What value do your present possessions have on an eternal basis? Very little. And so Jesus' point to this guy, divide the inheritance with me. Make him divide the inheritance, rather. Jesus' point is you are thinking about things the wrong way. You have a bad priority set. What kinds of treasure should I be prioritizing or accumulating given this value proposition? The value proposition is eternity is real. Jesus is going to judge. My earthly possessions are not going to help me in that judgment. So given that value proposition, what should I value in life? What even counts as valuable? How should I measure that value? And Jesus' point again, the one who is what? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Are you accumulating treasures that God considers to be valuable, things that will help you in your relationship with him? This kind of thinking, or lack thereof, really, was on display repeatedly in the clashes over the Sabbath. One of the things we haven't really talked about, we're going to talk about it when we pick up Luke at the end of the year in the fall. There's been a number of clashes over the Sabbath in Luke's gospel, and there's going to be more to come. And it demonstrates this kind of thinking disconnect between what Jesus is striving for us to have and what we see in the Pharisees and those around him. Luke 13:10. He was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years, and she was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are freed from your disability." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and she glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, "There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day." And might I say how absurd it is? Could you please do your super awesome miracle on another day? Come back later and have miraculous healing. Just how absurd that is. We think about what Jesus did. Even if you want to take the strictest possible definition of the Sabbath, Jesus, the work, quote unquote, that Jesus did was he put his hand on the lady. That was it. That's what he did. The rest of it was supernatural, not really tied to physical labor at all. It was a total supernatural outpouring. It wasn't really connected to any labor or effort at all. But the audacity to see this thing happen and be like, you did it on the wrong day. And of course, Jesus points out their hypocrisy. The Lord answered him, "You hypocrites!" And it comes back to consistency, doesn't it? It comes back to the alignment between the things we think we believe or say we believe and the way that we act. Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water? You can't just let the animals have no water for a whole day, especially in the hot sun of the summer. You're going to go lead your animals to water. And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath? As he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the people rejoiced at the glorious things that were done by him. Jesus, thinking about the Sabbath, began with eternal concerns. The eternal concern in this case being God's care for people. And we're not going to read these verses. We'll read some of them. We've read some of them last week. 12:6 and 7, 12:25 through 30, 13:34 through 35. All throughout this section, Jesus is emphasizing God's care for people. If that's my baseline is God cares for people. That's the baseline I have. From there, he interprets the intent of the Sabbath. The intent of the Sabbath is for the benefit of people, for the benefit of the Israelites. And in fact, he says that in other places. We don't have time to get into it now. We will, again, later on in the year. He interprets the Sabbath as an outpouring of God's concern for his creation. And if that is the true basis of the Sabbath, if that is the true eternal concern here, ought not this woman be freed? Ought not this woman be released? Yes, even on the Sabbath. Because it is God's care for people that forms the basis of his interpretation. He also points out another kind of hypocrisy that arises from their lack of spiritual thinking. The hypocrisy, not just of this strict interpretation, even though they do something different, but the hypocrisy of you have literally seen a miracle occur in your midst, and all you care about is it wasn't done the right way. The level of hypocrisy to see the works of God done and question, well, why did God do it that way? It's his power. He's the one. He's allowed to do what he wants. And yet we can't get over our own interpretation and our own thinking. The most poignant example of this is Jesus' teaching on worry. We'll spend the rest of our time thinking about this particular teaching in Luke 12. Verse 22, he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." One of the main manifestations of spiritual thinking is how much worry or anxiety we have about physical things. And we could say it a different way. I realize as I read that out loud, it's not clear. The amount of worry or anxiety that you have about physical things is a good indicator of how spiritual your thinking is. how much you are thinking spiritually versus thinking about things in a physical, temporal way. Do we really think that life is about more than survival? Life is more than food, the body more than clothing. Or we might even go one step further. Do we think that life is about more than pleasure or comfort? Do you really think that? What foundational idea in this text allows us to release our worry and anxiety about temporal concerns? He is ultimately commanding us, do not be anxious. Let go of the worry and anxiety. Now, he does give us the foundational sort of eternal concern upon which to base that thinking in the next few verses. Verse 24. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, they have neither storehouses nor barn, yet God feeds them. It's interesting the contrast. The guy in the story, tell the guy to divide the inheritance with me, and he tells the story of the guy, I have nowhere to place my stuff. I got to build more barns. I got to build more storehouses. And then he contrasts that with the ravens. They have neither storehouses nor barn, yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you're not able to do a small thing as that. It's interesting how Jesus calls adding an hour to your life a small thing. I don't think most of us would call that a small thing. But again, Jesus is measuring things on an eternal time scale, in which case an hour, not that long. It's a small thing. Why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Do not seek what you will to eat and what you're to drink, and do not be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows you need them. The eternal concern is the character and nature of God. Who he is forms the foundation for spiritual thinking. In this case, his character and how he provides for the natural world. His concern for his creation. And his concern for his creation is forming the basis of this spiritual principle of letting go of worry. Because my eternal concern is the character of God, the thing that he has revealed to us about himself. And so we also place ourselves in comparison to him. Okay, well, I'm thinking about God and his character and his attributes. What do I have in comparison to that? What kind of capability do I have? How powerful am I? Our worry and anxiety have no lasting effect. That's Jesus' point. Which of you by worrying can add an hour to his life? None. The implied answer is none. These are temporal, not eternal. These are unable to affect reality. In contrast with the care and providence of God, which is manifesting all the time, every day, in the care that God shows for his creation. Thus, grounded in eternal thinking and principles, Jesus gives the practical effect then. If you're grounding your thinking in eternal concerns, the character of God and his concern, the practical effect is let go of your worry and anxiety. Let God have the worry and anxiety. Let him demonstrate the care and concern, and you trust and have faith. Instead of being so wrapped up in the worry and anxiety of life. He keeps going in verse 31. Instead of the worry and anxiety, seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. We begin with the spiritual, eternal concern, the kingdom, and from that God will indeed provide the temporal. But fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with treasures in the heavens that do not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Thinking spiritually manifests in a realignment of priorities. What do you care the most about or think about the most? What do you put first in your pursuits? Best example of this, we already did it today, is the offering. I don't know if you gave today or not. You probably did. This is just something you do. You give to the offering plate. When you are considering your budget, your money, when you get whatever paycheck you get, are you first considering, how much am I going to give of this to God? Versus the opposite of, I get my money, my paycheck, whatever it is, and I'm going to put all of that into these temporal buckets of food and clothing and shelter and whatever it is. You have your own budgets, line items, and maybe you don't make a budget. That's part of the problem too. There's a seek first or seek last. Out of your money, whatever it is that you get, is the first thought, this is what I'm going to give to God, and I'll make the rest work with whatever it is? Or is the God-giving part the end of the equation after you've done all your other calculations? That's just one manifestation of this, one example of if we put earthly concerns first, it's no wonder we can't think spiritually. Spiritual thinking begins with the eternal principles and grows into the physical temporal concerns, not the other way around. And a lot of times in life we do it the opposite. At the heart of this is the necessity of a consistent, coherent view of reality. Many of our problems come from the disconnect between what we think and what we do. We talked about hypocrisy twice in these chapters. And if you believe in eternal judgment, what did that imply? What should that imply, rather, about how you deal with present temporal concerns? Most of the problems of the early church and Christians today is we do not have the consistent chain of reasoning from this very basic principle, God will judge everyone for eternity. We don't reason from that basic principle consistently into every other area of our life. So when we think about consistency between speech and behavior, I say I believe in judgment, but then my actions really don't demonstrate that at all. I really care more about what's going on in this life. Proper prioritization of material and spiritual treasures. I say I believe, but really I just want to accumulate as much stuff as I can. Again, there's an inconsistency there. Willingness to endure temporal discomfort for Jesus' sake. That's what he's saying about acknowledging me before men. The implication is there's going to be times when you don't want to acknowledge him before men. There's going to be times when you might be tempted to hide your faith, hide your belief. But if you really believe in eternal judgment, you really believe what Jesus says, would you hide your allegiance to Jesus? Would you hide that? The freedom from care and concern that comes from an eternal mindset because I'm putting spiritual things first. And I trust that God is going to provide for me. And of course, ultimately, the willingness to act boldly based on the character of our eternal God. And this is in chapter 12, beware the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. For us as Christians, we believe certain things, or at least say we believe certain things about God, about the Bible, about Jesus, about whatever. If somebody didn't know what you believed and only judged your life based on how you lived, what they could see in your life, what would they think about your beliefs? And I suspect for most of us, for a lot of us in different times in our lives, especially those times when we are struggling more, somebody on an outside observer, an independent observer, would conclude, you know, Chris, he really doesn't care about spiritual things that much. He cares more about, put whatever you want to put in there. He cares more about his earthly family. He cares more about his hobbies. He cares more about, I don't know, whatever you've got going on. Consistency begins with acknowledging a worldview based on Jesus' identity, God's identity, judgment to come, and then applying that consistently in every area of our life. As we conclude, we're going to sing the invitation song, Have You Been to Jesus for the Cleansing Power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? This song is a beginning, an invitation to the beginning of spiritual thinking, right? Spiritual thinking begins with, we know that God will return, Jesus will return to judge the world. Am I ready for that day? Am I ready for that moment? Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Because if you haven't, the answer is no, you're not ready. You're not ready for when he will return. I don't know when that will be, but I would urge you to be ready. Come.